Welcome back to State Reppin', everybody, the one-time radio show, now podcast, where we find out what politics is really like at the Capitol. Capital of Wisconsin, Madison, Wisconsin, to be exact. From the perspective of our two co-hosts, Darrin Madison and Ryan Clancy. Welcome, both of you.
If you're not stepping, you're not repping.
Both are state representatives from Milwaukee. One loves raisins, and the other, not so much.
Wait, which one's which?
I tell you what about raisins. You bring them in my face again? Those are fighting words.
If you guys want to learn any more about raisins, go back to our last episode. Last 15 minutes was devoted to raisin talk, so you're going to love it. Besides raisins and getting the word out about them, the goal of this show is to demystify politics. Stump speeches and buzzwords, they're great to watch on TV, and what I think a lot of us think of as politics. But how does all that grandstanding actually translate to making our communities better places to live in? So that's what we're trying to do here. Have an honest conversation with two people in the thick of politics as we try to figure out how we can use politics for good. We got a lot on the agenda today, guys, but let's start out with just a little bit of small talk. How's the last month been?
It's been rough, man. I'm tired.
Dog. Yeah, it's been really intense. I had my first office breakdown, which, it's hard to not feel the impacts of failing fighting for the people that you represent. And yesterday was one of those moments, and in a perpetual cycle of losing, right? So it's been a rough month in the Capitol for us.
Yes. You are absolutely right to feel bad. I want to push back on the idea that we're failing, because I know that your work and my work is vital, and I'm glad that we're there doing it. We knew going into the budget yesterday that the amendments that we proposed and authored probably wouldn't pass. We knew that, the overall budget would pass through the assembly, but that doesn't make it easier, because as you talk about it for 8 hours, going in there that it's bad, but talking about it for 8 hours, you understand the real effects this is going to have on people, and it sucks.
Yeah. When does that hit you? Does that hit you on the speaker floor right after the vote? Does that hit you when your words don't get listened to and you feel like you're falling on deaf ears?
It's in a variety of moments. Sometimes it's after, sometimes it's before. Like the drive up yesterday was we're heading up. The air quality sucks.
It was a
Supreme Court decision was made as it relates to affirmative action, and we were voting on a budget that we knew would pass, but the harms of it will go so far and feed into a long perpetual cycle that create losses for working class citizens and and for the folks that are most left behind in the state of Wisconsin. So I was mad going up.
Yeah, you alternate between mad and sad.
And then, sitting on the floor and listening to the remarks of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, it hit at a certain point in being on the floor, and I needed to take a step back. I needed to leave the floor, have a moment, come back, and continue to be in space and be a part of the conversation. And you're right, it's these moments feed into a longer trajectory about as it relates to what we can do and how we can get there, but it doesn't make the losses any less painful.
Yeah. And I got to say, the folks that I've seen that do this job the best are also really impacted by it, right? There's something weird about being able to turn that on and off, and just walk off that floor and be like, yeah, well, we lost one, we'll get the next one. I don't trust folks who have that reaction to it. And I think, everybody does it in different ways. I got to say, I am incredibly grateful for Darrin's support personally, and that we have a socialist caucus that we can lean on and that we can evaluate policy through and that we can use to support, I think, other folks in the larger Democratic caucus that need support and need to be emboldened. And I'm grateful for that. I don't know what it would look like if Darrin specifically wasn't there and if we hadn't come in together.
True.
We're going to get to the state budget in a little bit. I think that's kind of the major thing that's happening at the Capitol and seems to be what's taxing you guys the most. But I'm a little curious, and Darrin, you touched on this when you were first talking about the Supreme Court decision to end/attack, depending on which headline you read, affirmative action in colleges. How should we think about affirmative action in this ruling?
Yeah, I mean, as we think about the intentions behind affirmative action in our country, it was one piece of acknowledgement of the fact that there is prejudice in this country. It's inherent. There is no such thing as a colorblind society, that exists in this world, and that we should be addressing the disparities that come as a result of that. It was a pathway that was created for communities of color in particular to be able to have access to post-secondary education, to upward mobility, and a real opportunity at thriving in a country that for hundreds of years systematically put them at a disadvantage.
It was ridiculous to me to listen to the folks in the assembly yesterday cheer over that. So Robin Voss said, I wrote this one down, "It is a great day for people who believe in a race-neutral society." And there were versions of that by many of our colleagues across the aisle on the Republican side. All basically, we were treated to like a 10-minute lecture on genetics and how between that and between we're really all the same inside. The whole idea was that race doesn't matter and that we shouldn't be looking at race. We shouldn't be considering that. That was clearly in their talking points, when they caucused beforehand. And it was revolting and it was embarrassing. And the idea that we would say that, or imply that because we're all, we're all the same, that we don't need to look at race. We don't need to address race. And that they would then go on to dismiss an amendment that tried to restore the positions to the UW system that were taken out because they were, quote, woke or related to DEI.
I want to talk about that, yeah.
Is absolutely ridiculous.
These are kind of, when they get up and kind of talk in bad faith about everybody's neutral, everyone's the same inside. Is this what hurts so much? Is hearing these people kind of use pretty language in bad faith?
Yeah, I mean,
to a very negative agenda.
I can
just imagine watching that and boiling on the inside, or just.
Yeah, the very first session that we had, or one of those early sessions, I remember someone standing up and quoting Martin Luther King, to bolster a piece of legislation that was not a reflection of his fight. And, another one of my colleagues, Lakeisha Myers, stood up and gave the full quote because, folks chose language without giving a full interpretation of what he was saying, right? A lot of folks speak about things on the floor and, talk about, the impacts of building a society that we all want without an understanding of what that really looks like, about an understanding of what real equity looks like, and what, a true, society that ensures that everyone gets to what they need looks like. Equality is not that, right? That's not a representation of a balanced society. An equitable society is that, right? When folks are paying their fair share, when folks are ensuring that communities get the support that they need, right? If we're talking about, take race out the equation. If we're talking about, an education system, right, which we have had many conversations about yesterday, that's quote unquote equal, right? You talk about walking into the same classroom where, we're teaching a lesson the same way to everyone, including, our young people who are struggling with mental health issues.
I just think about it. All my friends, everybody learns differently. Everyone's at
Exactly.
different levels. I mean, it's just
Right.
human.
You have kinesthetic learners. You have auditory learners. You have, you got so much diversity in thought, and lived experiences and supports that each individual student needs. Right. We know that, and we were talking about Ryan being a teacher, and teaching 44 students. We know that, it's impossible to support 44 students as one teacher, because each one of those students has specific needs to be able to learn the lesson plan. And if a teacher can't provide the supports that each of those young people need, folks are going to be left behind. That's having 44 students in the classroom and teaching the same lesson plan without giving the supports that each individual needs is equality. Equity is giving each one of those students the supports that they need to thrive. And that's equity, right? So going back to the overarching conversation at hand, sitting on the floor and folks talking about, a race-neutral society, it's not it. And it is offensive. It's painful for folks to navigate. But it's also, what makes it even worse is that it empowers folks who are watching, who are listening, to carry that rhetoric with them and believe that that it's okay, to carry that rhetoric.
And you can't see into their brains, but gut feel, is this them being misinformed, or is this bad faith? Is this using pretty language to do negative things that they know are pretty negative?
I think it's bad faith for when I hear folks like the speaker saying it. I think there are folks on the other side of the aisle who genuinely just don't know, because you only know what you've been exposed to, right? Exactly. If you've never been outside of your community, if you've never taken the time to learn what it means to appreciate the identities of folks in this world, you're only gonna know what folks have taught you. But
I'm thinking about the small town I grew up in. There was 2 black folks in it.
Right.
A representative from my small town, you wouldn't be exposed to that. So, yeah.
So it's, it's both. It's both.
Yeah, and sometimes there's not a lot of difference between malice and willful ignorance, right? And I get it, like it's tough to put in the work to evaluate, what's going on in front of you. But to hear, a 10-minute diatribe on genetics and how we're all the same, I really appreciated our colleague Supreme Muramukunde's response to it, which was, those are really pretty words. The next time I'm pulled over by a cop for the color of my skin, I'll be sure to record that and play it back to him. So I think folks have some work to do, and I don't necessarily recognize a difference between malice and just not putting in the work to figure out why things are happening, or to deny what is right in front of you, and to deny the lived experience that people standing just feet away from you are testifying to.
You're in an elected position. You're a leader. You're supposed to seek out that information.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, I'm going to tease it one more time. We're going to talk about the budget right after this, but let's talk a little bit about
commercial break.
Let's talk a little bit about the shared revenue bill that we talked about last time. That was passed in the assembly last time we talked. Shared revenue, again, for everyone just listening for the first time, is municipalities and cities get taxed, pool their money. It goes into a big state pot, and then based on a formula that they were updating just in this last bill, it gets dispersed back out to these cities and municipalities. What happened with that? Is that at the Senate? Did that get passed? Did Governor Evers veto that?
It passed. and Governor Evers vetoed it. No, sorry. Governor Evers signed it in Wausau, Wisconsin, because he didn't want to be anywhere near Milwaukee when he signed that, because he knows in some part the negative effects that it will have on the city and the county. And it was cowardice.
You heard it here first.
I was going to say, not
Ryan
much more to say
Clancy
besides
calling
that.
out Governor Evers. Catch these hands.
All right.
So and where that leaves us?
Yeah,
is
sorry,
that
I should ask.
So
What can we do about that, or
The
what's up?
city and the county then get to decide whether or not to tax our residents in this incredibly regressive way. So it passed out of, at the point of this recording, passed out of committee for the city. The larger common council still needs to weigh in on it.
Oh, okay.
We will have our version of that at the county on July 11th. At 9 a.m., I guess we as supervisors hear the expert opinions first. There's going to be a report on, my guess it'll just go into the worst case scenarios for departments and all that. I did say when that report was ordered that I expected and hoped that it would also take into account the impact on individual residents and how much everybody's going to have to pay per year and what percentage of their income they're going to have to pay. Because if you're poor, sales taxes hit you a lot harder than if you're rich. So we'll see what that happens. But July 11th, it'll be the supervisor part at 9 a.m. Then I think at about noon, we'll hear public comment.
What day is that again? Public comments. Anybody who wants to come out and share their opinion on that.
Yeah, and that'll be, you can show up. It's probably 203R in the courthouse. You can show up. You don't need an appointment. You don't need to register in advance. I believe it'll be hybrid, so you could go to, you could just type in milwaukee.gov/testify and sign up for that.
Perfect. Kind of interesting what you just said there about that these experts were putting metrics out there and telling all the common council about the metrics that are going to harm the city itself, but not the residents in the city, just the agency themselves.
And that's been frustrating. So I think, I assume that it'll pass at the city. I think it'll probably pass, unfortunately, at the county as well. And those are kind of different votes. I mean, the city's looking at insolvency much faster than the county is. I think it's much easier for me to take a no vote on it at the county than it would be at the city, frankly. But it's a bad tax. It's regressive. We should be pushing back on it, but we should have the ability to look at that data and to actually talk about what this is going to do to individual households and individuals as well.
So interesting. Changing the metrics to really tell the real story, not just the story they want to talk about. One last time, the regressive tax you're talking about, that is a sales tax. Is that 2% in Milwaukee?
At the city, it's going to be 2%, and then at the county, it'll be 0.4%. So right now we have a 0.5% county sales tax. This will just about double it.
Is that going to get us out of the financial cliff, the insolvency?
No.
No.
So
what?
so there'll still be a $20 million deficit at the city.
Depends on how you count it, but yeah, there'll still be a deficit.
Yeah. So there'll still be a deficit, both at the city and the county. There will still have to be cuts to be made. There will still have to be cuts that will have to be made in both governments to ensure that they put out the pension obligations. Yeah. It's less of a cut, but it's still cuts nonetheless.
It's frustrating to hear people talk about all these new great
wild.
things that we're able to do with this money, because literally we can't. The money is all earmarked specifically for pension obligations at the city. Where there is extra in a year, it goes towards more cops that we can never get rid of, because in previous episodes we went over those constructs. But it means more cops forever. It does not mean new spending. It doesn't mean innovation. There will be some dollars that are freed up from our existing pension obligations that we can put towards other things, but it's a Band-Aid, not a
fix.
Not a fix, not a cure.
And the sales tax will go away after the pension obligation is paid, which
How long is that?
30 years.
they estimate 30 years, right? It could be longer, it could be slightly shorter, but what that means is that it's kind of a kick the can situation too, for the city and the county, as there will be new financial issues that they will have to navigate at that time, and they will have to go back to the state and ask them for more money.
And of course, the overall better solution is to just tax the rich and then give us back more of those dollars in real new shared revenue dollars and not force us to tax our own residents in a regressive way. But we need definite change in the seats in the Assembly and the Senate to make that happen.
Last teaser, we're going to talk about that millionaires getting maybe tax breaks in the budget that we're about to talk about next. Was there one last thing? Was there a referendum that we were talking about last episode that would have to go to the city of Milwaukee for us to all approve or vote on 2/3 to say, yes, we want this sales tax increase to pay for just these pensions?
So let's tell you about that referendum. So initially,
What happened there?
There was a referendum that would have gone to every resident in the city and the county. Then, that during the negotiations, that's what they were pushing for. They were pushing to get that removed, right? So that the vote went to the city council.
Yeah.
And and the initial proposal was that the entire city council and the entire county board had to approve the sales tax for it to pass. So it took the ability for the citizens to make that decision, put that in the hands of the entire city council. Now it's at a point where it's 2/3 of the city council and 2/3 of the county board. And that's where we are. So the decision won't be in the hands of the public as a whole. It will be in the hands of those bodies.
And the folks who were at the table, right? So the Democratic leaders, as well as the Democratic leaders, essentially used their political capital to get that. Instead of taking all the terrible policy provisions off the table, their hard line was, no, we can't leave this up to the people, because it's wildly unpopular, right? I don't know if you've seen it, like even the most recent Marquette poll says that people don't want this sales tax. So it would have failed. It would have failed a referendum. And because they hadn't worked to get more real shared revenue dollars, it would have been bad for the city, was I think their line of argument. So they spent a lot of time and effort and capital making sure that we took it away and that it isn't a popular vote, because it's an unpopular vote, but really just put it in the hands of the electeds and putting the onus on them. And I think they'll get it. I think they probably have 2/3 at the city and the county.
Yeah. Got more questions, but let's move on. I'll stop teasing you guys. Let's talk about this budget. It just passed the state assembly and is now headed to the Senate or the governor's desk. Before we talk about it, I'm going to read a little bit from you guys' press releases. I'm very curious kind of where these press releases come from, and I think this will be a good way to us deconstruct what we read and what we get communicated from you guys. But can you guys take us through what the process of budgeting is like? You talked about this a little bit before, and it's kind of the main stay of the legislature. It takes up a lot of months. How has that been for you guys? When did you start, and how did we get to this vote that just happened a couple days ago?
Yeah, so I'll just specifically talk about this budget.
Please.
This process began at the end of last year. Departments began shaping up what they needed, and began to prepare recommendations for the governor. The governor simultaneously went around the state and had listening sessions with communities to talk to them about what they needed. The governor then, right after the November election, began setting up meetings with all of the representatives and all of the senators, asking them about their priorities and their district's priorities, in which we all had the opportunity to have one-on-ones and talk about what our districts needed.
Were you guys sworn in at this point? Because weren't you guys sworn in January?
Correct. We weren't sworn in yet.
Okay, yeah, but he was still having those conversations with you.
Right, as a prerequisite, right?
Yeah.
So around December and early January, the governor's office is beginning to really solidify their recommendations. And then you get the state of the state, which we had towards the end of January, in which, the governor gave his vision, right? His vision for what Wisconsin should look like through this budget process. And then, we get a final bill in the somewhere in February that was sent to Joint Finance. Joint Finance the Joint Finance Committee, which is composed of 16 members, only 4 of which are Democrats. The rest are Republicans. There are 2 Democratic two Democrats who are state representatives and two Democrats who are senators. LaTanya Johnson, Tip McGuire, Evan Goike, and one more person.
Is this where it gets really piecemeal together?
So that committee is the ones who end up making the big, the big budget decisions, right?
Budget.
So the governor sends his recommendations. Joint Finance also has its own subset of listening sessions, and they listen to folks throughout the state. That happened from, February all the way to, the beginning of either end of March, beginning of April. And then the committee meetings really began to hammer out the budget. The very first meeting in Joint Finance.
Can I step in with what should happen in like a functioning democracy? And then you can talk about what did happen?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what should happen in the normal budget process is that like all the people on that committee, regardless of party affiliation, have just spent months listening to the concerns and the fears and the desires of folks all around the state. And they say, you know what? We've heard you. We're going to take what the governor has given us and make it even better. And maybe take a couple of things out and add things, maybe add funding here and there where we hear different priorities.
But based upon these public listening sessions, based upon people.
Yeah.
But this is what happened.
Or they, could say we can take money from this to fund this piece at a higher scale.
That we heard 12 people say was really important.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But that didn't happen.
No.
I was going to say, do people listen in these listening sessions? Are they actually
so
listening?
one more aside, and then we'll go to what actually happened. Way before I was elected, I brought my child Sebastian to a listening session because he was really into the idea of driver's licenses for all. And we sat there, and the Republicans make it intentionally difficult. They never have listening sessions in the city of Milwaukee, right? The only one they had near us was out in Waukesha. It was the day after the general election.
This
when
year.
people, this year.
This year.
But in this previous year, it was down in Oak Creek, which was as close as they got to Milwaukee that year.
So they don't do any listening sessions in Milwaukee, the largest populated city in Wisconsin?
Definitely not. No, you definitely wouldn't want to talk to your dense urban thing. And you also, if you're a Republican and setting up a listening session, you don't want it anywhere near mass transit. You want to be sure that it's really difficult to get to it, that only certain people can get to it in the first place. And then you make people wait for 3 or 5 or 7 hours before they can speak for their 2 minutes and be cut off. So we were sitting there watching, and Seb and I was like, hey, do you know how this works? We were kind of talking about it. And I was like, can you guess who the Republicans are? And he went through and nailed every single one. And when I asked him, how did you know? It was they weren't listening. They weren't even looking at us. And he was 100%, got a gold star for that. So to answer, are they listening? I think it depends on who's up there.
From the eyes of a 12-year-old.
Right. This was years ago. I think he was 8 at the time, and still had that insight. So it still sticks with me.
Indeed.
But anyway, back to what happened. So JFC looked at the governor's budget.
They said, hey, this budget, and we're going to strip 500 items out of the governor's budget.
How many items are on the governor's budget?
More than that.
But not much more.
Close to half?
That's majority of it's majority of his
it's
budget.
not much more than 1,000 items.
Correct.
Okay, interesting.
So that's called going back to base. So they basically went back to base and started building their own budget, right? Taking whatever the things that they really loved in his budget and claiming them as their own victories, and funding them at substantially less than where they should be funded, all for in an effort to, say government should be small, and still function. If anybody runs if you've ever run a business, right, that you cannot run a business that's been thriving with 7 locations, and then say we can shrink its budget and it'll be okay.
It'll be the same thing.
We can cut its staff by majority of, by 75%, and it'll be fine. They cut the funding of so many programs that are essential to the state of Wisconsin, and so that I feel so that later they can say, you see why this program's failing, because government doesn't work for you. So you should just keep your money. The reality is it's not failing because we're not funding it at the capacity it needs to be funded. We're not saying, when I think about funding government, I'm not saying that like we need to be overfunding things. I'd say we need to give, departments the resources that they need to be the most effective, to meet the needs of the most marginalized. So
I've been thinking about this lately too, and like government does do things pretty good sometimes. They pick up all of our trash. We have water in our houses, sanitation,
For
sewers
now.
work well enough. I was thinking our slogan should be like "Make government better."
Right,
Like
right.
it does things. It does pretty good things.
Yeah, and there,
My side.
nowhere was that more obvious than during the early days of the pandemic when people were applying for unemployment. And there was a massive backlog of people, both because everybody was applying at the same time, but secondly because the Republicans had defunded
that department, right? They took
that
all the
department for
computers
years.
out.
Yeah,
Mhm.
they were using computers that were decades old. They didn't have enough staff, and then the Republicans still point to that as a failure of government and not their failure to properly fund government to provide services when people needed it the most. And that is just a fundamental disconnect in, I think, how we look at things.
I know it's that rhetoric. You can pretty that up and say, "Yeah, look, these guys are bad at it."
yeah.
But
So they built a budget, and then there's a process where joint finance is going through their committee meetings, which happened until last week. And they
this
go
is
through
like-
all of the departments and they decide, what's going to be in the budget, and then they deliver that budget to both the Senate and the Assembly, and then both bodies vote on it. The Senate voted on it 2 days ago, and then we voted on it yesterday.
Okay, Senate goes first.
And part of the process for that is that you can then craft amendments to either put back in some of the things that were there before, or to get innovative and kind of add additional things. And I think Darrin and I think we were both on 10 of the 13 amendments that were presented yesterday. And it was frustrating. We only got 10 minutes to discuss each of these. And each of these was, tens or hundreds or billions of dollars. And it was frustrating to see them dismissed so quickly. You also saw the Republicans kind of whining and saying, "Oh, like these were just dropped on our desk to get today." They were all things, for the most part, that had been, single thing had been talked about before. It was either part of the budget prior, or it had been, rolled around as standalone legislation. So these weren't surprises, but they were raising these procedural, arguments because they didn't want to engage with those ideas. Like one of the obvious things that anybody should be in favor of was restoring some of the dollars to childcare, because in this budget, if the governor signs it, we're going to have child care centers going out of business. People have estimated roughly 25% of the child care facilities will be out of business within the next, matter of months. That's bad if you care about families. It's also bad if you're a Republican who really just cares about businesses, because as it turns out, as both a family and a small business owner myself,
You're a
child
family
care is
yourself?
I am a family myself. I'm that good.
Yeah, pretty much.
Patriarchy. I love it.
As a small part of a large family at a co-owner of a small business, like child care is incredibly important. And I can't tell you the number of times when, somebody was unable to take a job or unable to come in, for a long period of time, or had to quit because they didn't have child care. And at our business, fortunately, you can bring your kids most of the time, but not every business, has that luxury. And child care shouldn't be a luxury. But that was one of the hundreds of things that we attempted yesterday to put back in. And we tried to hold them to task and say, like, how dare you vote against something that would save childcare. And then a month from now or 2 months from now, they're going to be on the floor saying nobody wants to work anymore. Everybody's lazy. We can't do these handouts and everything else, when they took away the ability for individuals to get to work and to have a safe place for their own children. It's just incredibly frustrating process.
Darrin's press release title reads, "Republican budget gives tax breaks to millionaires while leaving 87,000 children behind." I think that's what you're talking about. It goes on to say, most egregious of all, the Republicans cut funding for the Child Care Counts program, even though it would lead to the closing of approximately 2,000 child care programs and leave 87,000 Wisconsin kids behind. Is that what you were just talking about there?
That's exactly it. Yeah. So Child Care Counts
what is that?
was, the name of of a program specifically created in here in the state of Wisconsin using federal dollars to subsidize childcare in the state of Wisconsin throughout for both providers and for families.
What does subsidize mean?
Offset the costs, right?
Is that like they pay the child care centers, they give them maybe 50% of what they would charge the family, and then that family only gets charged 50%?
We already know that there's exuberant, the cost of child care is exuberant, right?
It's crazy.
During the pandemic, there was a bunch of federal dollars that came down to be able to support child care, especially where we were navigating so much, right? Pandemic, the loss of so many lives, and so many changes in the workforce.
Schools being
right?
closed, yeah.
So that's why that program existed. It did so much. There was so much growth that was able to happen through that program, and I want to be clear, the model is not perfect, but it did a lot to help Wisconsin families. We could definitely do better. But to say that we, instead of funding this program, we are going to provide a tax cut that will most directly benefit the richest in Wisconsin, and for the folks who make under $50,000, they'll get approximately $36 back. That's disrespectful. That's offensive. That it does not make sense.
And that's one of the worst parts about the process, right? I mean, we all agree that we can do things better. Like, if we wanted to tweak that program, great. Like, let's do that. But the Republicans take things out.
Yeah, do they
and
put
we're like,
anything
great, so
in?
Yeah, no. So like, what are we going to replace this childcare with? And they're like, nothing. We're going to give this money to the very rich. We're like, wait, no, that's not an alternative. So it's not like they're presenting another compelling vision.
Yeah.
Either broadly or on specific programs. They're just saying, no, we're just not going to do this thing anymore, and we're going to take those dollars and give them to the very rich. And that's not sustainable. It's not realistic. It's just bizarre.
And Ryan, your press release reads, it gives 11 people making $75 million or more a year an average of $1.8 million tax cuts, while someone making $50,000 will receive $36. So 11 people. That's what this tax cut is for?
Yeah, I mean, and for people making above $100,000 too, they also do very well, right? So, I mean, I don't want to discount those folks, but it's so frustrating when we have such pressing needs, right? And that's a real easy call for I think most people, regardless of your income. If I was one of those very rich people, I would look at that and say, no, like, we need childcare. Like, that helps our society, that helps our community, even more than giving me $1.8 million on average myself personally. It's just irresponsible. I don't know how anybody looks at that and says we're going to gut basic needs in order to hand out money to others.
Hear, hear. Darrin, you write, actually. They don't support Medicaid expansion, even though it would help working people and save the state over $1 billion. The Republicans even stood together while voting down an amendment on expanding Medicaid for postpartum women, despite the fact that 27 Republican representatives have co-sponsored that exact same bill.
Yep. Yeah, so, there was a bill that was circulated by Republicans earlier this year, literally months ago. And it had 27 co-sponsors from their side of the aisle. All of us signed on because it made sense, right? Why wouldn't we extend postpartum care? But, when it came to it being in the budget, they're like, nah, we're not doing that. So, I mean, it makes no sense. Folks aren't even honoring their word.
I was going to say, why would they do that? Is that so it looks good that
they got to stand in lockstep, right? So Robin Voss tells them how to vote. If they accidentally voted for something that had broad bipartisan support that they had already voted yes on, that might open the door to other really common sense measures. And then where would we be? We'd be like actually looking out for residents rather than trying to score political points.
So you really see it as this long-term hold on to power dynamic.
Right.
Yeah.
I can see it.
If it's a win for the other side, then it's a loss for you. And that's a super toxic way to look at governing.
It's not a good way to look at anything. When you said that it would save taxpayers $1 billion, and what exactly is Medicaid expansion?
Man, it's, dollars. So the Medicaid expansion is, there are federal dollars that, so many states have opted into receiving to support our healthcare system, right? And in that same vein, be able to provide healthcare for so many folks who don't have access. In the state of Wisconsin, we have a program called Badger Care. The amount of people that, actually just got taken off of those roles are substantial. I don't have the stat on me right now for that number of folks, but I could definitely bring it in next time we have next time on our next episode, because we were just talking about this in April, right? Because those folks got moved off of Badger Care and off of, the only access to affordable health care that they had literally a month ago, right? Because during the pandemic, access was increased because there was another form of federal dollars that ensure that folks had access to health care, which is great, right?
Sure.
Especially during a pandemic. That should just be the standard. Everyone should have access to health care. There are countries around the world that do it for free. Right. Why don't we?
Right. And these dollars have been sitting there. Like, even prior to the pandemic, we're one of only 10 states who literally opted out of this. We're like, no, we don't want to take this federal money. It was under Scott Walker. He was like, we just don't like the idea of using taxes for good things. And I'm really not paraphrasing here. He just had a theoretical problem with providing health insurance to our poorest residents who needed it the most. And they didn't, and the new crop of Republicans didn't want to change that. There's no rational reason to not take the federal money that's on the table that would just allow us to expand an already successful program. It makes no sense.
Correct.
So, yeah. And when you say access, sorry to cut you off, but when you say access, does that mean that they lower how much your annual income that qualifies you for Badger Care, or they raise it? So like now it was $20,000 before, now it's up to $40,000, and if you only make $40,000, then if you make $40,000, then you have access to this Badger Care.
Right. So if you make, if the raise,
and so now it's back down to 20,000. Just saying numbers, but and then so all these people get kicked off. Gotcha.
Yep. So folks who if you were like me a few years ago when I was making $27,000, right? And the bar was $20,000, right? Mm-hmm. $27,000 isn't enough to afford for the enroll in healthcare and any policy plans that will charge me $200 and something, maybe upward of $500 and something a month, right? Just to pay for having the healthcare, and then dealing with co-pays and other aspects of going to the hospital.
Those are high deductible plans. Those are like $5,000 out of pocket. So.
Yep. Right. So, but with my $27,000, I wouldn't have access to that, right? Because the bar threshold would be me making under $20,000. We know that $27,000 isn't a living wage. We know that $33,000 isn't a living wage, right? We know that, the cost of things are going up with inflation. We need to raise that bar because there are so many folks who don't have health care at all and aren't going to the hospitals.
And that's just it. So, like, even if you hate the poors, right? Even if you do not want to give, you have a theoretical problem with giving people health insurance, it's more expensive for people not to have health insurance because, they're not going to be productive if that's the only way you're looking at people. They're going to end up going to emergency rooms where the medical care is far more expensive because they didn't get that preventative care to begin with. Like, any way you look at it, either because it's the right thing to do for people or because you hate people and you only look at them as a thing to exploit, either way you go, it doesn't make sense to leave that money on the table. That's what's so ridiculous about this.
I know. And then you think about the real impact of someone getting kicked off of that and not having access to health care. We were recording an episode with the Comic Cafe workers that went on strike a couple of years ago. And as we were recording, a couple of the guys opened up beers and we started drinking. And then one guy said, "No, I can't drink tonight. I've been coughing up blood." And I need to stop drinking for a couple weeks until this goes away. There wasn't even a conversation of like, hey, did you go to the doctor? Hey, are you going to go? It was just understood that he doesn't have health care and could not pay for this. So he's going to keep coughing up blood.
Yeah. If only there was another system. The one that like literally every other industrialized nation is using. I don't know. I'm sure something will come to us.
Yeah. One day.
Yeah. One last thing with this budget. I think a good framing, and maybe we should have started with this, but very interesting to me. Darrin, you write, Republicans voted for the largest increase just a few weeks ago of public funding for private and charter schools. They claimed that operating in the best interest, they claimed to be operating in the best interest of students and young people in our state. Now we see the values that they really stand for. What's up with that? So again, that is them paying.
What's
saying,
the deal with private education? I mean, come on.
And I'm laughing about it right now
because they're funding education, and they can say they're funding education, but then they don't add these things into the bills, into the state budget. Where's the think we all know
it's so many layers to this, right? When Republicans, want to create a vision that, or an image of supporting something, what they do is they privatize it, and then they give it money, right?
Public museum, I think, is on that list.
Correct, right?
Yep.
Our museums, our parks, our education system, which we're talking about right now, which aren't accountable to our standards, right?
And you hear horror stories about that. Schools being next to liquor stores, not having playgrounds. Exactly.
Right? And then, also, can discriminate against our young people, right? I literally hear stories all the time of folks, and I've gone to charter schools myself, right? In my early education, I went to a charter school. Then I was like, I ended up going to a public school because I had one of my favorite teachers of all time. I wanted to have her as a teacher, and I did. But I remember the experiences of my charter school. I remember the experiences of other folks, right? Being forced into an ideology that may not fit you, who you are. And if you don't choose to conform to that, you face consequences. What does that sound like? Right? It's not a representation of what we want this nation to be. It sounds like an attack on DEI. That's what this bill does, and it actually increases taxes.
It does really?
Property taxes will increase substantially by $640 million because this new equation for funding voucher schools. But Republicans cut taxes, right? For who? Right. At the end of the day, we must always ask the question, for who? And who suffers as a result of this, right? Yeah.
And it's, the Republicans, frankly, were having a field day with that, right? They, I should say here that Evers can veto this budget and should veto this budget. I've had policy differences with the governor before, but the one thing I know, it's shocking, but the one thing that I always knew was that he had our back on public education. As a former public educator myself, I knew that he was good on public ed. And this is his chance to veto a budget that does a tremendous amount of harm. And really, it is the biggest giveaway to private ed that we've ever seen. And the Republicans on the floor yesterday were trolling him for it. They said, now Tony Evers can be the private education governor too. And that is what he will become. He will lose his base. He will lose my support if he signs this thing. And it has been incredibly frustrating to see him buckle when we need him the most.
Do you think he's going to sign it?
I hope that he doesn't. In fact, he said very explicitly that if the cuts to the UW system, regarding DEI, that the Republicans were calling woke positions, remained in there, and if they weren't restored, that he would veto it. So I'm going to take him at his word. I'm going to assume that our public education governor will veto this very private education bill, which is also a huge attack on the working class.
What can regular folk like me and Diego here do about this?
Talk to the governor. I mean, let him know that your expectation is that he's not going to sign something that's an attack on the working class.
True. Letters.
Is that
Emails,
letters?
Carrier pigeon.
Phones.
Chain yourself
Text.
to his fence. Can
Sleep on his lawn.
chalk his driveway. Yeah, lot of creative options here.
Yeah. I can picture the art students in PS going up with
There we go.
chalking
Yeah,
his
right.
lawn outside.
We can't afford chalk, but if we could, we'd be there chalking that driveway.
Maybe we can put out a link for some donations. Okay, I think that's probably it for the budget. Anything last you guys want to talk about? I've got one more thing I want to talk about, and then we can get to the best part, community questions.
No, that's good.
Yeah.
It helps to kind of unload this trauma.
Yeah.
I wasn't. I mean, because we just passed it yesterday, and I think it was rough. It was a really tough day, and I'd forgotten about this podcast until the morning. I looked at my calendar, and I'm like, shit. Like, I love doing this podcast, but I don't want to talk about the budget again. But this is good. I feel like this is a way to unpack it, and it's not signed yet, right? And there is
There's still
hope
something
here.
we can do about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, a little bit lighter news. Ryan, you were just on 620 WTMJ Brewers Talk Radio, the home of the Brewers.
I think AM Talk Radio, conservative AM Talk Radio, might be my new political home. I had so much fun on that.
I really like conservative talk radio. It's very fun. At American Family Field, you guys were talking about the Brewer Stadium funding and the renovations, public dollars going towards that. What's going on there? What should we know?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that conversation kind of mirrored what a lot of people are saying, which is how do we get the Brewers the money that they need to not leave our community? And I pushed back on that the other day on AM 620 on John Mercury's show. Thanks for having me on, John. Because they were framing it as like, should we get, how do we get them the money? And I pushed back on that and said, no, like, I'm only in favor of public dollars going towards a private team and making more billionaires if we can get a piece of the team. So let's, I think I managed to use the phrase seize the means of baseball on the radio, which I think was fantastic. But I want to change that conversation, right? And I want the Brewers to be creative in what they're asking and not to do what many other teams have done and just say, pay me or we're out. Because they talk a lot about how invested they are in their community.
I know.
Then show us that, right? And stick around, whether it's a fund where a part of the proceeds of things sold at the stadium goes into, to making those extensive renovations, to make sure that every stadium is in the top 25% of stadiums, which is mathematically impossible, or whether it's, being flexible on what this looks like. I want to change that conversation from either they leave or we give them the money, or how do we get the money, to how do we ensure that we're not just subsidizing billionaires, which is what it is. Because that team has gone from a $200 million asset 20 years ago to $1.6 billion today, while the asset that we had that enabled that is just depreciating, right? It's just a piece of property that's getting older and that it needs more repairs.
The field,
so that is not a healthy relationship. They called it a public-private partnership, and I said the public is not coming first in this at all. It's just the opposite.
So they make all this money and then they don't invest it into their facilities? Is that...
They make a big deal out of, like, they pay us $1 million rent. They're like, oh, we're basically a landlord. We pay the state $1 million rent a year, but they're asking for, $20-30 million a year. So that's not actually how a landlord relationship works.
Right.
It's right.
No.
The power is not with the landlord in this case.
We're paying you your rent.
Right.
And did we build this stadium in the first place? Was that all
Yeah,
public dollars that built American
and
Family
that's
Field?
and that's the bigger argument here, right? So it cost $400 million a couple decades ago to make. There was I think the sales tax generated over $600 million, and now they're asking for another $450 million. So if we had taken over $1 billion and invested it in anything else, in housing and education 20 years ago, the payoffs would be so much more than just having given it to a team. And yes, like, when we make people super rich, they pay a little bit more income tax, right? They made some jobs, although there were no strings attached, right? They're not union jobs. They're not making a living wage, selling beer there. If we're going to invest, we need to put a lot of strings on it. We should be getting part of the team back.
They need to give us our tree fitty.
Exactly.
How did Conservative Talk Radio respond to that?
They were not prepared for me to want to socialize baseball. But we don't have to look far, right? Like the Packers are an example of a locally owned team. So like when I bring that up and their little heads are exploding and I'm like, wait, the Packers are basically socialism. They don't want to, impugn our fine Packers. So it was fun. I suggest you listen to it. It was a great conversation.
Yeah, maybe we'll link to it. And yeah, funnily enough, the kid one of my friends growing up was a Packers fan, and in his basement was the shrine of the $500 stock certificate he got into Lambeau and into the Packers. Like he loves showing people that. It's a piece of pride for him. Let's do that with the Brewers. All right, community questions. Let's get to it. Aaliyah asks, Darrin, what'd you eat to get food poisoning?
Wow. I don't want to tell you what I ate because I really enjoy the place I ate it.
Oh, no.
So
I'm glad you didn't drag them through the mud.
I can't. They're delicious.
You should blackmail them. The next time you go in, be like, look, I didn't say your name on the air.
They totally hooked me up to that day because I also I was 50 cents off from paying them perfectly for my food. So they're like, nah, bro, you're good.
That's why they sold you one that was 2 weeks old. I think we might have gotten to the bottom of this.
I think you assumed that it was 2 weeks old. It was totally fresh.
You got food poisoning, so I might be right here.
As right as you are about eating spoiled food with your iron stomach. Ryan eats all the spoiled things in our office.
I eat things that are maybe a little bit past their expiration date because I'm really cheap.
By a little, he means sometimes 3 weeks.
The last one was sketchy.
See?
But I didn't get sick. You got sick.
I mean, that's because you've trained your iron belly.
See? Right.
In different
you
countries.
gotta have more discipline.
I mean, first of all, this is the part of the journey, right? So
yeah, you're right.
I've taken my first step.
Oh, you're like
in training.
You're like a food poisoning Padawan.
Yeah, exactly. You know what I'm saying? Except I won't eat our 3-week-old food. I give it to you.
Not yet. Not yet.
I don't know why this man is speaking this into existence. These are fighting words. I'm not doing it.
Barfing words.
Disrespectful. As I lived on my hallway floor over past weekend, it was just like a 24-hour thing. I literally died and I was reborn. They tried the food tried to bury me, but it didn't know I was a seed. I grew.
I'm not sure how that metaphor works.
That's a good metaphor. I like that. All right, Veli asks. I'm glad you're feeling better, Darrin. Did Veli asked, did you guys meet any superstars at the DSA gathering in D.C.?
Dibs.
Yeah, all right, fine.
So, we got to see our favorite, and I mean our favorite socialist duo.
They're awesome.
From Colorado. They're
like us.
They are us, but
Colorado.
With Colorado. They're so great. Well, I mean, let me be clear. Elizabeth is better than both of us combined.
Elizabeth's pretty cool.
Javi's
cool too.
Javi's a legend on the block. When I tell you Javi is, when it comes to housing, this man is cold. He's done so much. He was literally steps away from passing his housing legislation. I'm pretty sure they'll make it happen soon enough. Elizabeth is a very fierce black woman in the legislature in Colorado. And she has the ability to galvanize folks around her in a way that's dope. So we got to hang with our favorite duo that we met a year ago. Well, not a year ago, almost a year ago, at Socialism Con in Chicago, right after we all first got past our primaries. So yeah, those folks, and then we also got to meet the legendary Cori Bush, too, and alongside all of our other dope elected socialists.
And honestly, they were all superstars. Yeah. Like I, that sounds like a really politician answer, and forgive me, but like it was amazing to be in a space with I mean, dozens of other, socialist electeds from around the country.
People are doing just what you're trying
Exactly
to do.
right. And to not have to explain basic shit, right? Like, yeah, everybody needs food. Yeah, everybody needs shelter. And then let's go right into policy discussions and talk about our victories and talk about our losses and how we learn from each other. It was awesome. I loved it.
Is that what you guys talked about? Lessons learned?
Yeah.
This is the policies that work. This is the
Lessons
policies
learned, the policies that were successful, policies that weren't.
Yeah.
Like Nashville just got over their fight with, Major League Baseball. They lost their arena fight, but there were a lot of lessons that they learned in how to navigate that. Lessons that we could use right now. So, yeah, it was a lot to learn and be in space with folks, and begin to think about systems we can create to support each other. While we're trying to pass legislation in our various legislatures.
Do you guys have a group chat with your superstars?
We do
from
now.
Colorado?
It's great, and it's just full of like, oh my gosh, look at this thing that I did, or it's the most wholesome space on the internet ever.
We were just talking about how literally there's like two of our new homies that are in a Netflix documentary.
Yeah.
No, I haven't seen it yet, but I saw the picture of them on the screen, so I gotta find the documentary.
Are we gonna talk about
do you
the
know which
poll
one
or
it
not?
is?
Huh?
We're gonna talk about the poll.
Absolutely not, Ryan Clancy. Why do you always do this?
Did you say pool or poll?
Poll.
What kind of poll are we talking about?
We'll bring
Darrin?
it up when the results come in.
No.
It's like a
Ours is
poll.
already out.
Oh, we already lost?
It was yesterday. During the voting for the second round was yesterday.
Was yesterday?
While we were on the floor. It was unfair. So I'm gonna tell them to stop the steal.
I'm offended because we could have whipped those votes.
I think with this point we have to talk about the poll.
No, we can't.
You guys have been teasing it too
we-
much.
I think
Where's
that
this
you
poll?
can tune in next time, and we'll give you.
Okay.
the
Oh, there we go.
bids
It'll be a
on
teaser.
the polls.
I love this. Good radio.
Okay.
Very good radio, guys.
See, that's why
Damn
that's
it.
why I'm a co-host.
Oh, all right.
Bim, bim, bim.
Harnessing the lessons of capitalism
Yep.
to push socialism.
all day
Got to use the tools at your disposal, baby. All right.
to eat your enemy. You must become your enemy.
You are hot with the metaphors.
Pretty much.
This is good.
So basically, I got to become rich now, and then I can then eat the rich.
All right. All right.
Okay, a little convoluted, but I like it. I like where you're going with it.
So give me your money. All of it.
Yeah.
Run them pockets.
Terrence Cash App will be linked to the bottom. All right, Tom asks, what is something I can help out this month in Milwaukee?
It depends on what you care about, right? So if you want to weigh in on the sales tax, you can join us at the county. On the state level, you can certainly talk to the governor, make your priorities clear there.
Any volunteering stuff? Any
Yeah.
organizations that need some love?
Oh yeah, I mean, so Abolition just a few days ago had a video screening and a talk back about what's happening in Atlanta with Cop City, and the documentary.
I don't know the name of the documentary, but it was great.
Documentary was about so basically Cop City is a representation of a different model that was implemented in the 60s during the civil rights movement, where we were training cops to basically
Oh, yeah, I've been reading about that lately.
basically to create harms and prepare for like hostility towards protesters.
Domestically. Yeah.
And to create scenarios that did not exist. But we got the ability to foil, right, the dynamic between that situation and where we are now in history, and how think about strategies as it relates to preventing now to be a repeat, right? If folks are willing to host a screening of that, you can email Abolition, Abolition Speak Out, and set that up. It's so important to build a broader coalition as it relates to understanding the impacts of policing in our country and how to support the effort that's directly happening right now in Atlanta. We have our own fights here too, which Ryan talked about, but that doesn't mean that we don't show up for our allies in the struggle.
And we do have an event through Abolition Speak Out. It's 3:30 p.m. on July 22nd at Johnson's Park. So the last event that was there was in the middle of winter. It was very cold. This one should be good. I think Claiborne Benson will be speaking. If you haven't heard him speak, he's phenomenal. But that would be a good thing to go and just connect with people who are doing some real good, some real necessary work right now. So with the
See how to get plugged in, yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so last question, Diego. Do you have anything? Yeah, please.
I was just going to add that we were discussing that ways that just, ordinary people can get involved and help to sway Governor Evers to make the responsible decision when it comes to this budget. And one way that we could get Governor Evers to veto this thing is to threaten to take away his Diet Mountain Dew, because apparently that is his drink of choice, and I was told this by one of the Register of Deeds in the state. So, little trivia, but
I have brought that up 20 times as well. He loves Diet Mountain Dew.
Yeah,
That
so
is
just
true.
send him a letter threatening to take away all of his Diet Mountain Dew.
We
Let's
need
see.
to lobby Mountain Dew to stop the production of Mountain Dew if he does not.
Seize the means of carbonation.
I love it. See, Ryan has the razzle dazzle too.
We're not conservative talk radio, but we're pretty close. They still got the goods. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for coming. Thank you, Diego, for coming too. Lovely. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you next time.